It's pretty incredible that right after I started Straight Up Fight Network and the Straight Up Fight podcast, where the entire first podcast was about how people should be talking about the sport and the actual fights and the things that are interesting, and how the media shouldn't be crapping on their own fans, who are literally the people who are consuming their content. We have John Anik, who is perhaps one of the most well liked of all the commentary guys. Certainly, there's less controversy about him than Joe Rogan, who I actually happen to enjoy. And certainly a lot better than Daniel Cormier, and a lot more appreciated by the fans than Cormier. Perhaps the number one commentary guy, in most people's books. And he comes out and he just says one of the stupidest things a man could possibly say, who talks about the UFC for a living. And he referred to the fans as the lowest common denominator. He was talking about how he scored the fight between Duplessis and Strickland for Duplessis. And the fans just came at him on Twitter saying how, no, Sean Strickland really won the fight. It's a robbery. How can you say that? Your opinion is just ludicrous. And John Anik, in a sport about fighting, is going to get offended by the fans, and he basically offers up this ultimatum to the fans. Ultimatum might be a bit of a strong word, but he's telling the fans, he's saying to Florian, I'm not sure how much more of this I can take. Where the fans are, where we're dealing with the lowest common denominator. So a very, very, kind of passive way of saying the fans are the worst. We have the worst fans. They are the lowest common denominator. The lowest level of human intellect, the lowest level of people. And he's saying, maybe I should just move on and take my talents to the NFL, as if that's actually something that's within his purview. I mean, it's not like the NFL doesn't have a whole array of qualified broadcasters. I mean, John Anik isn't going to walk into the NFL and be the next Chris Collinsworth. Tony Romo seems to have a pretty good thing going. Not that I particularly love Tony Romo, but I mean, is John Anik is the NFL Network clamoring for John Anik? Well, according to John Anik, they are. And John Anik is brash enough to come out and call his own fans, his own followers, the people who literally watch him week in, week out, and refer to us as the lowest common denominator. Fight sport is about entertainment. And one of the most cliche, classic statements made by fighters and about fighting is, love me or hate me, you are going to pay to watch me fight. And John Anik has to believe that as well. Love me or hate me, you're going to be watching the fights. That's all that's really important here. It doesn't matter whether you agree with Anik that Duplessis won, or whether you agree with the fans that Strickland won. And by the way, I also scored that fight for Duplessis. I literally scored it the same way as the judges did, right? Two of the three judges, well, really all three judges scored the first round for Strickland. They scored the fifth round for Strickland. And then the second and fourth round were for Duplessis. And the only round of dissension, the only dissenting opinion was what happened in round 3. Everyone said round 1 is Strickland. Everyone said round 5 is Strickland. Everyone said round 2 is Duplessis. Everyone said round 4 is Duplessis. The question is, 2 of the 3 judges said that the third round is for Duplessis, and 1 judge actually gave round 3 to Strickland. I scored it the same exact way. I scored 1, 3, and 5 to Duplessis, 2 and 4 to Strickland. I'm sorry, I got the order wrong. It was 1 and 5 to Strickland. I'm sorry, that's how I did it. It was 1 and 5 to Strickland, right? Because Strickland won the first round with the jab, and then Strickland came on strong in the 5th round. But 2, 3, and 4 were Duplessis, right? That's the way 2 of the 3 judges scored it. One judge said, no, Strickland won the 1st, he won the 5th, and he also won the 3rd. But I'm not ashamed to say that I thought Duplessis won the fight. I don't care who comes at me. The fans who think that Strickland won the fight, they're not bad fans. They're not the lowest common denominator, and they're not coming at John Anik because they don't like Anik. They're coming at Anik because they wanted Strickland to win. This is fight sport. This is entertainment, and they like and are fans of Sean Strickland. So in a close fight where they're watching the fight wanting and hoping that Strickland wins, they see their guy winning. MMA fans aren't the lowest common denominator. The fact that so many fans are passionate and care and are coming at you over your opinion shows that not only are these fans not the lowest common denominator, these fans are better than the fans of any other sport. They're more passionate than any other sports fans. And the fact that John Anik can insult his own Twitter followers and his own UFC viewers is really asinine. And also that he thinks that if he were to just go and be a broadcaster of the NBA or the NFL or the NHL or any other sporting organization out there, that he's not going to be dealing with fans who disagree with him, that's just insanity. Fans disagree and fans go at the athletes and the broadcasters in every sport. LeBron James is widely considered to be the second best basketball player, or in many people's eyes, the best basketball player of all time. And the amount of garbage that he takes on Twitter and in the media is a lot more than anything John Anik is ever going to touch. But LeBron can't just come out and say, hey, I hate all our fans are the worst fans of all sports. No matter how good, no matter how Joel Embiid, multiple-time All-Star MVP of the NBA, people crap on him continually. That's just the way it is. When you have good fans who care, when they feel like you didn't bring your A game or when they feel like you were wrong on something, they're going to let you know. And that's going to be the case in Major League Baseball. That's going to be the case in hockey. That's going to be the case in soccer. That's always the case. So John Anik needs to drop the act. And then Anik has an interview with I forget the name of the person who interviewed him, but it was someone from MMA fighting as well. And he did an interview where he came out and said Anik tried to apologize. He said how he's live on broadcast for 8 hours. And there's 8 hours of footage each week for people to sensationalize his words. So Anik is trying to give an apology and say that he didn't mean what he said, but at the same time he's saying, it's not my fault. The fans sensationalize what I say. How did the fans sensationalize what he said here? He literally called the fans the lowest common denominator. And he's not sure how much longer he has in the sport dealing with the lowest common denominator. So how can John Anik be giving a somewhat of an apology and then also say that the fans are sensationalizing what he said? When you say that the fans are sensationalizing what you're saying, I didn't say exactly that. I didn't really hate on the fans. But you really did hate on the fans, John Anik, because you said our fans are the lowest common denominator, right? You said you don't know how much longer you can deal with the lowest common denominator. John Anik also said in this quote-unquote apology that while he has his entire broadcast and all of the stuff that he does for the UFC proper, on his podcast, sometimes he lets the fourth wall down. And that was where this happened. So if John Anik is saying that on his podcast he lets down the fourth wall, he's saying, I let the fourth wall down. These are my true feelings. What I say on the podcast is how I really feel. And he's apologizing for letting us know how he really feels. And what does he really feel? That the UFC fans and the MMA fans are the lowest common denominator, and he's not sure how much longer he wants to deal with them. John Anik also said that he's on Twitter to follow MMA fans and make their day. He says that when he is on Twitter and he wants to engage with the fans and he wants to follow the fans because when they see John Anik gives them a follow, it's going to be a great day for them. It's going to make their day. But at the same time, all those people whose day that you made by following them back, you just called them all idiots. You just called them all the lowest common denominator. The worst fans of any sport. And the guy who was interviewing him said that this is a good Rorschach test. His words are a good Rorschach test to see what you actually feel. Meaning you have a Rorschach test is blots of ink. And they make a shape. But it's up to whoever's looking at that ink to say, hey, this is what he really meant. This is what he really said. But when you listen to what John Anik actually said, It's not really much of a Rorschach test because he was very black and white with saying the fans are the lowest common denominator in MMA. The MMA fans are the lowest common denominator. So how can you really perceive him to be saying anything else than what he actually said? One of the other topics that we have outside of John Anik hating on all the fans and saying that he wants to move on to football and then retracting and saying, actually, I have a signed UFC contract up until 2026. So clearly, he doesn't really have any plans of doing anything else but the UFC. But putting that aside, we also have all the talk about UFC and UFC 300. I'm not sure who exactly was the starter of the idea that UFC 300 has to be a massive card. I think it was Dana White. I think Dana wanted to go all out and say, hey, UFC 300 is going to be epic. But there's just so much talk about UFC 300 and what's going to be the main fight and this is supposed to be historic and all that. But it doesn't really matter. UFC 300 is just another fight card. And at the top of the card, you already have, you have a woman's fight first, Weili Zhang versus Yan Xiaonan, which most people aren't really going to care about. Because Weili's going to be, picked to win. Yeah, she's pretty good. She's one of the best female fighters on the roster. But UFC 300, is that really what everyone's going to tune in for? No, it's going to be everyone tuning in to see Justin Gaethje, the fan favorite, the guy who has the BMF for beating Dustin Poirier, and he's going to go against Max Holloway, one of everybody else's favorite fighters. Justin Gaethje versus Max Holloway. It's everyone's favorite on one side versus everyone's favorite on the other. And immediately, just with that one fight, you have every UFC fan, every fight fan is going to tune in to watch this. So it doesn't even matter what else is on the card. But it also happens to be that you have Charles Oliveira facing off against Arman Tsarukyan. And if you're a real fight fan, Oliveira versus Tsarukyan is an epic fight. Oliveira's always entertaining. He's always exciting. And Tsarukyan's coming off of a crazy flying knee, versus Dariush, where he just put Dariush's lights out in a way that Dariush it doesn't usually happen to him. Dariush had been on like a 9-fight win streak until he finally lost, and now he went against Tsarukyan, and Tsarukyan just blasted him. So this is an epic fight, Oliveira versus Tsarukyan. So you have Gaethje Holloway, Oliveira Tsarukyan. Then you have Yuri Prochazka fighting against Alexander Rakic. Doesn't matter who Yuri's fighting against. Yuri is a super, super exciting fighter. And then after that, you have Calvin Kattar, a pretty exciting fighter at featherweight, going up against Aljamain Sterling, who's moving up to 145 to face him. The X-135 champ moving up to 145 to face Kattar. Pretty exciting fight. Then you have Bo Nickel fighting against Cody Brundage. Yeah, the opponent doesn't matter. Everyone's going to tune in to watch Bo Nickel. Then you have Cody Garbrandt, ex-bantamweight champion, fighting against Davison Figueiredo, who's moving up to bantamweight. Or he already did move up to bantamweight when he beat Rob Font, but he's going to be fighting against Garbrandt. So this is already absolutely sensational. Not to mention you have Bobby Green versus Jim Miller. So when the UFC goes and adds Holly Holm versus Kayla Harrison, yeah, big whoop. Nobody cares. Holly Holm is 1,000 years old. She hasn't been interesting since she had kicked Ronda Rousey. That was the last fun thing that she did. Kayla Harrison, most UFC fans haven't ever seen her fight. She was fighting in PFL. We don't know who she was fighting against. She didn't even win every fight there. She lost to Larissa Pacheco in a rematch where she was supposed to win. So nobody really cares to watch Kayla Harrison in the UFC. Yeah, maybe the media does. Maybe Ariel Helwani does. But to the fight fans, this ain't a big deal. And Jessica Andrade, she fought a whole bunch of times last year. At this point, she's lost so many fights, no one really cares against Marina Rodriguez. Nobody cares about that fight. No one really cares. Beyond maybe a couple of media members. But UFC 300 doesn't need anything else. It doesn't need, a Colby versus... Not a Colby. It doesn't need Edwards versus Bilal Muhammad. You already have the Gaethje Holloway. You have Oliveira Tsarukyan, Prochazka. You have Calvin Kattar versus Sterling. You have Bo Nickel. You have Figueiredo versus Garbrandt. You have Bobby Green, Jim Miller. It's already there. Every fight fan is there. And every fight fan would have been watching this, even if it was a whole bunch of tomato cans and then Justin Gaethje versus Holloway on the top. Granted, you don't want to do that because then you're making yourself like boxing, where you just have an amazing main event and then the whole rest of the card is just, complete trash. But it would still do the job. And I know that it's UFC 300 and it's a multiple of 100 and it's a big deal and Dana White's been going on about it. That's all promotion. The fight fans are going to tune in for the card no matter what, and we already have some crazy epic fights coming up at UFC 300. Before then, we have a Vittori versus Brendan Allen fight card. We have a Sean Brady versus Vicente Luque fight card. We have a Amanda Ribas versus Rose Namajunas fight card. Tuivasa versus Tybura fight card, and Sean O'Malley versus Marlon Vera, which I think got scrapped, and then Dustin Poirier on that card versus Benoit Saint Denis. And then we have even some more cards in between then. So we kept really quite a long time until UFC 300. But let's not worry about it too much. It's going to be fantastic. It doesn't need anything else. If it gets it, cool. If not, not. And we'll take it from there. Until next time, this is the Straight Up Fight Network.